Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and today we're going to be talking about leasing. And yes, this pretty much means I'm going to continue this series. I actually filmed 3 videos on the first day. I just posted the first one yesterday, and it did really well. So I think that if I can make money from sitting in my living room talking about buying cars, I'm going to do it. But anyways, if you aren't familiar with me, I worked in the car industry for about 3 years. Most of the time I spent as a salesperson. I did spend the last 6 months as a manager type person. And so I just learned a ton about the car industry, about buying cars, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there was a little bit more that I could learn, but I'm at least going to impart what I learned over those 3 years to you guys to basically make your car buying experience a little bit easier and hopefully lead you down the right path so that you can make the best purchase decision. That all being said, let's get into leasing today. So in the first part of this video, I want to talk about the benefits of leasing. Then I want to talk about the downside of leasing so that you guys kind of have like a whole picture of what it is. And I'm going to try to simplify things as much as I can, because if you do any sort of thing with financing, you know that leasing is pretty complicated and there's so much that goes into a lease that it's not as simple as just borrowing a vehicle for 3 years and then turning it in at the end and borrowing another vehicle for 3 years. I wish it was that easy, but it's not. So let's get into the benefits. So the first benefit of leasing is obviously the fact that you can get more car for the money. And what I mean is leasing allows you to buy a much more expensive car at a much lower payment typically than what a financing payment would be. So then you can get a more expensive car for less money. So that sounds like a no-brainer. And again, that's a huge positive of leasing. And the way that this typically works is leasing is obviously contingent upon how many miles they give you per year. It's also on the vehicle, the depreciation on that vehicle, because the biggest thing about leasing is you're pretty much just paying off the depreciation on the vehicle. Again, there's a little bit more that goes into that, but simplified version is you're just paying off the depreciation of that vehicle. So since you're not paying for a vehicle in full, you're not paying the full taxes on the vehicle, you're not paying the full everything in full, you're only paying the depreciation, it allows you to buy a lot more car. And then also the leasing terms themselves also help you out with getting a lower payment, because you can lease a car for anywhere from basically 12, 24 months, somewhere in that range. I really haven't seen that many leases for 12 months. Most of them I see for like 24 months plus. But you can lease, I've seen leases as long as 72, even 84 months, which some of you are going to say that's ridiculous. I won't even take a finance out to that long, which I understand that. I personally wouldn't, but there are leases that go out to that long, and certain situations with certain people definitely need to have a lease that long, so I completely understand it. That being said though, just being able to buy more cars is definitely a huge benefit of a lease. The other nice benefit is the fact that you can go through cars a lot quicker and a lot easier with leasing, because if your payments are lower, obviously that allows you to basically go through cars a lot more quickly, because you're not going to have this massive car payment necessarily. The other nice thing is the fact that you turn the car in at the end. That also is a huge benefit. So then maybe you want to have a new car every 2 years. Maybe you want to have a new car every 3 years, 4 years, whatever you want. You just lease the cars for that amount of time, and so you can always get a new car all the time. You don't have to worry about maintenance. You don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff, because you always have a new car. And that's another benefit, is the fact that leasing allows you to have a new car all the time. And that sounds just wonderful for a lot of people, because new cars, right, you get the newest technology. You don't have to deal with reliability problems. Well, I mean, it depends on the brand you buy, right? But typically you don't have to deal with reliability problems because the car's covered under warranty, and usually in the first few years, cars will have some problems, but usually they don't have a lot of problems until later down the road. And just with all of that into consideration, it's just this nice little thing that, I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, right? You get a brand new car every few years, you get a lower payment on that car, and on top of that, you don't have to worry about maintenance. I mean, it just sounds like a perfect world, but it is not. So let's kind of get into the negative part of leasing, and I'm going to have to explain a few more terms once I get into this. Now that we've gone over most of what I consider the positives of leasing, let's get into a few of the negatives of leasing. Now, the first thing that is a negative of leasing is the mileage constrictions. Most leases, well, I shouldn't say most, pretty much every lease is going to have some sort of mileage thing where they say that you get typically it's 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, sometimes even 18,000 miles. Well, it just vary lease to lease, but they all pretty much have this amount of miles you can drive. If you do like a really high-end car, the mileage is going to be a lot less. Like Aston Martin leases, I think they only give people like 2 to maybe 4,000 miles a year, depending. So a lot of these high-end cars, you just don't get that many miles, whereas your regular run-of-the-mill car usually is at least 10,000 miles a year, and you can actually extend it up to higher mileages if you need it, but that will affect the lease, which I'll mention in a little bit. The other constriction of a lease is the fact that you don't own the car and the leasing company does. And I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, if you're financing a car, you don't own the car and the bank does. You're correct. The bank owns the car either way. However, if you go and damage your car when you are financing it, right, it sucks, but you're financing it, you just paid off, and yes, you still lose money if you fix it. You lose money in depreciation because it's damaged. So it's kind of sixes on that side, but it just feels a little bit different because when you're leasing a car and you damage it, that means that you have to get that repaired before you turn it in, or you're going to get charged, obviously, probably full retail for those damages from the leasing company, because then they have to deal with repairing the damages. So that is a drawback on leasing, is the fact that any stuff that happens to the car has to be taken care of before you turn it in. If you don't, you get fined for all that stuff. So like if the car needs new tires, if you have dings and dents that are considered more than usual wear and tear, then yeah, the leasing company is going to dock you for that. The next thing that is not really a downside of leasing, but I guess it's just associated with leasing, is the fact that this isn't necessarily the best thing for people that don't have great credit. Now, if you don't have great credit, you can lease, but a lot of the times it just shoots the lease rates through the roof. And what I mean by this is leasing is tiered, right? They do a similar thing with financing, obviously, where if you have better credit, you get a lower rate. Well, it's the same thing with leasing. If you have better credit, you get a lower leasing rate. And just to make this super simple without getting too much into leasing, there's a couple different things with it. There's cap cost, and then the biggest thing though is going to be the money factor, which isn't interest, but it's basically the finance charge that you're getting on a lease. And there could be a whole video made just about those two things. But those things affect the lease. Also, the other thing that affects the lease is residual value. Now, that's going to be associated with the vehicle and the mileage. That has nothing to do with your credit, so I'm not going to mention that in this segment. I'm going to mention a little bit later in the video. But if your credit's not so good, then you probably can't get the best money factor on that lease, which then obviously will raise the payment and could potentially make the payment higher than what it would be if you just did traditional financing. So that is another negative of leasing. Another big negative is just the amount of money that you're going to pay on the lease in the long term, and this is if you buy out the lease. Now, sometimes some manufacturers give higher rebates with leases, which could make it look like you're getting a better deal on the car because you're getting a bigger discount compared to if you financed it. And sometimes this makes sense, especially if you're just going to turn the car in at the end, or if you're going to sell it at the end, just something where you're not going to keep it. But yeah, sometimes leases give you bigger discounts, which could be on the positive side. But the problem is, if you lease to buy, you're just going to pay more money. That's the reality of it, because you're leasing the car. You're essentially, right, you're paying some sort of finance charge to a lender. And then typically if someone does a lease to buy, they're usually doing that because they're very payment sensitive. They're trying to stay in a certain payment. So then they go and finance the car after the lease. So let's say you lease a car for 3 years and your payment's $400 a month. And then you want to finance a car at the end. Well, you find out the only way to keep your payment $400 a month is you have to finance a car for 7 more years. So now you just leased a car for 3 years, financed it for 7 years. You just made payments on a car for 10 whole years. So yes, you are going to pay more for the car because you're just financing it for longer. You're paying more in financing charges over just the whole course of everything. So that's another negative of leasing. I think that pretty well covers the negatives and positives of leasing, right? The positives, again, I'll just quickly go over it before I just get into the last segment of the video. But the positives, again, right? You get to have a brand new car. You don't really have to worry about maintenance. You can go through cars really quickly, right? You can have a little bit of a lower payment as well. So it's just all these little positive things that add up to a lease. And again, you can buy a lot more car for the money. And then again, the negatives. If you don't have the best credit, leasing just might not work out, which just kind of sucks. You're limited on miles. Wear and tear on the car can cost you additional money that just might not be the most positive experience for you. You will end up paying more for the car if you keep it for the whole duration and then buy it out at the end. And then just, I guess the biggest thing is, just the fact that you have this stress that you're leasing a vehicle that you don't really quote unquote own it, even though again, if you finance a vehicle, you don't own it, the lender owns it. But I guess just, I understand that fear that people have that since you don't own the vehicle, everything, all the ownership experience feels like it's negative, which yeah, that kind of sucks. But hopefully this next part will kind of clarify some things to make it feel like you actually own the vehicle more than you do if you are leasing a car. And first off, I just want to get into what a residual value is before I get into that. So the one term I didn't mention is residual value. Now, residual value is what your vehicle is going to be worth at the end of the leasing term. And this is basically set based on the vehicle that you're buying and then also the mileage that you pick for the term of leasing. And what they do is based on the vehicle that you buy and how many miles are set for the lease, the lender that you're leasing through determines the depreciation on the lease. And what that then is called is the residual value. So this is what your car will be worth at the end of the lease. This is what you could buy it out for. Make sure that you see that before you lease a car so that if you do choose to buy it, you know how much you're supposed to buy it for. And just also know that because you didn't pay full taxes on the lease, that you do have to pay taxes again on the vehicle. And what I mean by this is when you lease a vehicle, you're only paying taxes on the amount that you're leasing. Well, you have that whole chunk of the vehicle that you haven't paid taxes on yet. So then you have to go and again pay taxes on the rest of the vehicle. So you're not paying taxes twice. It's just that you didn't pay full taxes initially. So you have to pay the taxes when you do buy the vehicle out. So let's say your residual value is $20,000 at the end of the lease. You have to pay taxes on 20 grand. It's just that simple. And then just finally to, I guess, clarify a couple things on leases. You can modify the car if you want with the lease. Yes, you can do that. Even though the bank owns it, you can do stuff like that. If you go over miles on the lease, what I would do is I would just recommend see how much the over mileage charge is, and then also see how much it is for you to sell the car, and then see how much it is for you to buy the car. Do all those things before you end up making a final decision to see which one makes the most sense, because maybe you're so over miles that it makes sense for you to just buy the car and just ride it out till you pay it off until you can buy something else. Or maybe the car is worth enough that you can just basically trade it in or sell it to someone, which you can do with a lease, by the way, which then in turn helps you save money. Or maybe the over mileage charge is very minimal, so then it makes sense for you to just turn it in. So just at the end of any lease that you ever do, look at every single aspect of it before you end up making a decision so you can see which one makes the most sense from a financial standpoint. Now, I do think that I'm probably gonna have to make a few more videos on leasing, on whether or not it's worth it, essentially. But hopefully this kind of give you guys a generalized look at leasing to just see if you want to lease a vehicle or not. If you happen to be stopping me for the first time, please subscribe, comment down below what you think, and then I will see all of you in that next video.